Picture it, you're in ancient Rome. The year is 44 BC, Julius Caesar lies dead, stabbed to death by a group of senators whose number may have included his great lover, Cleopatra's own father. And who else stands before them but Cleopatra, queen of the Nile and Caesar's former paramour, holding aloft not one but two infants, her newborn twins, both of them boys, both of them Caesars. The shockwave from this revelation could be felt as far away as Athens or even Spain. But how exactly would this reshaped history play out? Let's find out. Now, you might be thinking that sounds like an episode of The Crown, but no, it's actually a what-if scenario based on a real-life possibility from ancient history. You see, Cleopatra's son by Caesar was a little boy named Caesarion, but wait, pause the video here if you want to make a guess. We all know about Caesarion, but who was his sibling? Well, ahead of his birth, Cleopatra had given birth to another son, also conceived during trysts with his father. But unlike Caesarion, he was stillborn. Or was he? According to some accounts, including those of the Roman historian Plutarch, Cleopatra managed to conceal the twins' existence until well after Caesar's murder, at which point she revealed both babies to Caesar's assassins. Whoa, hold on a second. You might think that Cleopatra would have wanted to keep her second pregnancy a secret for obvious reasons. I mean, she could impossibly have imagined Caesar coming back from the dead to smite her for having a second Caesar. So why now? It's an excellent question. And the answer, as with so many things in life, can be summed up in the word power. You happen to be right. Things were pretty grim for Cleopatra following Caesar's assassination. Her position in Rome, along with that of her infant son, was precarious to say the least. In fact, Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew and eventual first emperor of Rome, wasted no time stripping Caesarion of his inheritance. So when Cleopatra sprung the second baby surprise, well, she hoped that having not just one but two Caesars in the wings would make it harder for Octavian to sideline both mother and sons. Unfortunately for her, her plan backfired spectacularly, and Caesarion and his twin brother Ptolemy ended up sharing not just DNA but also the throne of Egypt. You see, in addition to being half-siblings, they were also full-blown doulas, which meant that the country's affairs would be decided by sibling rivalry rather than shared purpose. Oh, and let's not forget, they were only supposed to share the throne temporarily. Ptolemy was first in line to inherit the kingdom, while Caesarion would get the more modest eastern province of Syria. Speaking of which, that brings us to our next big question. Did Cleopatra really have a choice in the matter? Now, there's no way around it. Having two heirs to the throne meant that Cleopatra's plans for a smooth succession were dead in the water. Not only would two co-rulers create instability and contention within the royal family, but it would also present a headache for Rome. We already know that Augustus was eager to box out Caesarion from any claim on Rome or Caesar's estate, and Mark Antony, his father's old rival and Cleopatra's on-again, off-again lover, wouldn't stand in his way either. With two young Ptolemies on the scene, however, Rome would be forced to choose sides or else risk dynastic instability within Egypt itself. So what happens next depends on whether Rome would prefer one puppet king in Alexandria or two. In the real timeline, Augustus's sister Octavia refused to accept Cleopatra as her brother's true heir, paving the way for Caesarion's deposition and eventual exile. However, this was likely only possible because Cleopatra herself had designated Ptolemy as her firstborn, and if she had presented both children as legitimate heirs from the start, things could have played out very differently. For starters, Antony might have been tempted to install both children on the throne in their own right, making them joint rulers of Rome's eastern provinces. But then again, that was exactly what caused the problem in the first place, and Antony wasn't known for making the smartest decisions. He was also wary of Egypt becoming too powerful, as demonstrated by his decision to annex Alexandria into Rome, only to reverse it after Cleopatra got wind of his plans. At the end of the day, the most likely course of action for Rome would have been to recognize neither child as legitimate heirs, plunge Egypt into civil war and then intervene to install their puppet ruler. But what if Cleopatra had other plans? Well, if she wanted to go down swinging, she could have taken advantage of her considerable wealth and influence to secure allies throughout the empire. As Caesar's widow, she had access to his former political network, not to mention her own extensive holdings in the east. Moreover, Rome was exhausted from years of civil wars and was in no mood for further conflict. So if Cleopatra had formed a coalition of senators and generals loyal to Caesar's memory, it might have been enough to prevent a full-scale invasion. After all, Rome didn't conquer Egypt until a decade after Cleopatra's death. However, the best route for Cleopatra would have been to play both sides against each other. You see, Augustus and Antony were constantly vying for power and influence, and Cleopatra knew that whoever came out on top would need a stable Egypt on their side. In the real timeline, Antony broke with Octavian, granting Cleopatra the title of Queen of the East and installing Caesarion as king of a client state. But if Cleopatra had revealed her twin early on, she could have wisely convinced Antony that both children should be made rulers, thus neutralizing any threat that they posed to Roman interests. Even better, she could have promised her hand and that of her surviving son to Augustus in exchange for military support against any potential rivals. Of course, none of this would have been possible without the help of Cleopatra's famed intellect and political acumen, as well as the shocking ruthlessness she displayed towards anyone who crossed her. Case in point, the murder of her sister Arsinoe, who was probably also a carrier of Caesar's blood. And speaking of Caesar, we've said it before and we'll say it again, you really can't spell Caesar without Rome. He would have been furious at being double-crossed and cheated out of fatherhood. But here's the thing, despite his flaws, Caesar was renowned as a brilliant military commander, someone who won more battles than he lost. So maybe he would have seen the writing on the wall and realized that his chances of ever ruling Egypt were slim to none. Maybe he would have recognized that the best way to honor his memory was to step back and let the Egyptians rule themselves. If he did, then peace might have prevailed. Unfortunately, this seems highly unlikely, especially since the real Caesar famously fell in love with Cleopatra and would have preferred her as his partner in crime rather than his queen. But what if we tweak this alternate history just slightly? What if Caesar had lived but was assassinated shortly after meeting Cleopatra? Then his will, written while he was still alive, would have held. Both of his so-called bastards would have been recognized as legitimate heirs, giving Cleopatra a much stronger hand in negotiations. Perhaps she would have even been able to convince Rome to respect her role as regent to her sons, similar to how Octavian treated her as queen mother after Caesar's death. And if Cleopatra pulled this off, she could have secured Egypt's future for generations to come, setting the stage for a golden age of Greco-Roman culture. That is, of course, unless her sons prove to be as power-hungry and incompetent as their real-life counterparts. So maybe it's better if Cleopatra kept her second son a secret after all. In the end, the biggest beneficiary of the twin dilemma would have been Cleopatra herself. By keeping Caesar's other son hidden, she could have avoided the civil wars and strife that ultimately led to her downfall. But perhaps the biggest butterfly effect from this alternate history would be felt centuries later when the Roman Empire finally collapsed. Without Cleopatra's children strengthening Rome's ranks, the emperors would have faced even greater threats from within and outside the empire, causing its demise to come sooner. As for our world, we can draw some parallels with modern times when royal couples like the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge or King Charles and Camilla had to contend with questions over the gender and number of their heirs. And yes, we'd all love to know what would have happened if Ivan the Terrible had had kids, but maybe some things are best left in the past. So what if scenarios are a lot like toddlers? They can seem cute at first, but if you let them loose, they'll turn your whole world upside down. So thanks for watching, and let us know in the comments what other pivotal moments you'd like us to explore in future episodes.